It is now my pleasure to welcome Anne Salim, who sits on the management board of ASSEK as the policy advisor. Welcome, Anne Salim.
Thank you very much, Michelle, and good afternoon to everybody. Thank you for joining us for this Nairobi feedback session. I'll start by giving a little bit of context of why this startup bill is important and what role we've been playing in the background to get it to where it is. And then for today's session, there's a lot of feedback sessions going on across the country. And I'm happy to share any links in the chat. For today's session, our primary focus will be on enabler organizations such as yourselves, the hubs and the incubator, the accelerator programs. Our focus today will be looking at why are they there, what's in it for them, what role will they play in fostering innovation in the country through the support of the startups. And I'm really looking forward to engaging with you all, to hearing your questions, to hearing the gaps that you think we need to address as the bill is going through the motions in Parliament, in the Senate first and then in Parliament later. This is the chance for your voice to be heard. So thank you once again for joining us, and I'll start. So just share my screen. As I wait for the host to enable me to share my screen, maybe I can just give some context. So around November last year, Senator Sakaja convened a roundtable with a couple of ecosystem stakeholders. And this included some representatives from startups, some lawyers, some government reps from the AG's office and registrar of companies, some enablers as well. And in this case, enablers meaning organizations that work with startups to help them grow and innovate even further. And in this meeting, the whole goal was to discuss how the Kenyan startups can be supported from a legislative perspective by government, and if there were any policy gaps that were missing to support startup legislation. So following that meeting, we formed a working group, and the aim of that working group was to develop a proposal that could be presented before the senator in January, where we're giving him the guides of what we think should be covered in a proposed legislation to support startups. When that happened, I think since January till now, we've been having a lot of interactive discussions with various stakeholders. And the goal of that is to come up with what is now the draft legislation that has been presented before Parliament. And our goal is to see Kenya have its first startup bill, which will go ahead a long way to support the startups. Again, we're seeing a lot of conversation that are coming up as a result of the bill. We'd like to remind everybody that this is a draft bill, and this is the best time to send in your input with regards to what you want to see change or which gaps you think we must address as of immediate concern, just so that the bill is as comprehensive as possible and it addresses the right issues. So with that said, I'll focus now on the highlights of the bill with regards to entrepreneur support organizations, which I will refer to as ESOs. So of course, we have a couple of definitions. 1 second. Now we can share my screen, just a minute. Okay, there we go. All right. Okay, yes, so we have a couple of definitions that are covered in the bill. We're looking at here the definitions of the startups, the definitions of the incubators. In the bill, we'll also look at some of the mandates of the entrepreneur support organizations. And here I'll specifically reference clause 19, 20, and 22. How are the ESOs supposed supposed to support the startups. It's a bit of a mouthful. We'll be looking at the clause 22, and I'm interested to hear what are the gaps you think are coming out as a result of this. Again, we will discuss in this session a little bit of the national vision. What's the overall aim of the startup bill? And of course, section 30, which talks about amending sections of the Science and Technology Act. And here is where we're looking at the different sort of amendments that will require now introduction of a money bill that can then be discussed in Parliament. So I'm interested to hear from you in the questions section. You can type your questions either in the chat or in the Q&A section about any of these sectors, and we'll cover them in detail. So for now, I'll give a little bit of some highlights. All right, so in the bill, we reference the startup incubator. And in this case, they're referring to it to mean a company, a partnership, a non-governmental organization, or a limited liability partnership whose principal objective is the support of birth and development of startups, innovation and related activities related to the transfer of technology and research, development and innovation processes through the offer of dedicated physical spaces and services advice. So when we look at the definition for the incubators, I guess some of the questions you would bring up are, does this suffice? Is it limited? Especially for us as organizations that support startups and innovators. Is anything missing there? I'm happy to hear your thoughts in the chat. Again, when we look at the definition of incubation, when you look at the report, they reference the Science and Technology Act. And so from the Science and Technology Act, incubation means the maintenance of enabling environment conditions for the purpose of facilitating growth and development of infant technologies, ideas, or industries. Again, the startup bill, yes, there are SMEs, but the startup bill is focusing primarily on any innovations that are leveraging technology to carry out their mandate. So with the whole goal of introducing this bill, it's going to be an act of parliament aimed at providing a framework to encourage the growth and sustainable technological development and new entrepreneurship employment, to create more favorable environment for innovation, and also to attract Kenyan talents and capital and for connected purposes. So this is really the goal of the bill, to create the framework. And of course, in the legislation that we will be reviewing, it's covering sections of the role of the national government versus the role of the county governments. And we're also going to look at the role of now the entrepreneur support organizations, that's the ESOs, who are hubs like yourselves, who are our members at ASSEK and others, and how we can facilitate this process to promote innovation, entrepreneurship in the ecosystem in the country. I don't know if up to there, if there are any questions that are arising with regards to some of the definitions that are out there. I think some of the discourse we've been seeing online has focused on the fact that a lot of the definitions still need to be addressed. And so in that sense, I'm eager to hear what you have to say on the same. Any comments up to there for now? Right. Just a minute. So, okay, I see a message on the chat. Oh, okay, that's us. Will the presentation be shared post the session? Yes, it will. I'm happy to share it. It just covers some highlights of the key points that are affecting this specific target group. So that's fine. All right, so moving on to the next point. So in the bill, we look at the role of the national government. So it starts by saying the national and county governments shall promote innovation. Let me just make the view full screen. Shall facilitate the transfer of technological innovation, shall create and develop a sustainable global competitive technological sector that contributes towards accelerated growth of the economy. The national and county governments shall also promote the creation of employment and wealth creation and promote the linkages between the universities and the research institutions and the business community. So if we come back to the overall discussion and the overall goals. Here we're looking at different roles played by different players in this ecosystem. I'll go back slightly to some of the previous slides. And so here we're looking at what does this bill say for in terms of coverage for the entrepreneur support organizations? What does this bill talk about with regards to what the entrepreneur support organizations can expect versus what the startups can expect? Are there any gaps? What does the chain of support look like? And this national vision, what would really be the overall aim of the national vision? So these are some of the things we'll be covering in the course of this discourse. Kindly send me your comments in the chat. I'm happy to engage as we move along. Or if you want to maybe get a chance to speak out, you can just raise your hand and we'll be able to enable you to speak. All right. So when we jump into the bill and we jump straight into section 4, part number 19 of the startup bill, of the proposed startup bill, they talk about certification of incubators. So there's a need for registration of both the startups and the incubators in this bill. Some of the conversation we've had online has said that this is introducing multiple registrations. So even as we go through this section, I'd be happy to hear in the chat which sections you think we must amend in that sense. So an entity might be certified as an incubator if the entity is registered as a public company or non-governmental organization, if it has a private or limited company, if it's a limited liability partnership or a partnership in itself. Section B says an entity might be certified as an incubator if it has its principal object the delivery of services to support establishment and development of innovative startups. Section C says if it has in place facilities suitable to accommodate innovative startups. Part 2 of that says adequate equipment for startup activities and innovation. Part D, if it is administered or directed by persons of the recognized competence on business and innovation and has a structure at its disposal for the technical and managerial consulting. And then again, we're also looking at part E that says you can be registered, your organization can be registered as an incubator if you have established collaborative relationships with universities, centers of research, public institutions, and financial partners that carry out activities and projects related to the innovative startups. So this is what you need in terms of your JD. If you need to be registered as an entrepreneur support organization, and specifically as an incubator, this is some of the requirements that you will need for the registration. Right. In section 22 of the same bill, we talk about the role, what you will be doing as part of your duties. So part A says, your goal is to support novice technological entrepreneurs at the earliest stage of technological entrepreneurship. Another part B talks about having a defined maximum and minimum technological innovation projects that you can handle simultaneously. But C, we're looking at you facilitating technological innovators to implement their ideas and form new business ventures. But D, we're looking at you determining the technological and marketing applicability of the technological innovation idea. Part E, we're looking at you having a viable research and development plan and expertise to support the startups. Here we're looking at part F, you have the ability to raise capital and prepare for the marketing of startups. Part G, provide secretarial and administrative services to the startups. Part H, create investment opportunities for the private sector, including for venture capitalists. I, transfer technologies from research institutions and other into the technological startups industry. And part J, enhance entrepreneurship in Kenya overall. So it's quite a mouthful, if I could say, but having seen some of these requirements in the mandate, what are some of your thoughts of this so far? Okay, I see some comments in the chat coming in. Are CBOs included in the definition of incubators? The list looks quite formal and may further restrict potential entities. Robert, are you able to clarify a little bit more on that? Let's see. I think I can enable your microphone if you're okay with that. Robert. All right, Robert, I've enabled your microphone to talk. Let me know if you're able to chat.
Hi, and yeah, could you go back to the slide that had the definition of the definition section?
Yeah, sure. Just a second. There we go. Yep.
I think all these entities mentioned here need formal registration. And that in itself can be an inhibitor because you want to make sure that you're including any possible entity that can incubate. And the same applies to the section 22 definition. It's overly prescriptive. That should be an either or. Not all incubators are going to be able to do technology transfer from universities, for instance. That's really ambitious.
Okay. All
so
right.
a lot of the definitions that were included in this act seemed not really to conform to reality. Also, the definition of a startup in section 8, the same thing applies, you know.
Okay. So what would you recommend in terms of modifications in that sense?
You want so like if you go to the definition of an incubator should be more loose. It doesn't necessarily have to be formal. If a CBO in Makueni is providing incubation services, but they don't have any form of registration, they shouldn't be inhibited from the incubator status or benefiting from any benefits that might be coming from the act.
Okay.
So, which the same thing that should apply in section 8, although I know that's not the focus for this meeting. The same thing for that section 22. So if you go to section the slide with section 22, you would see that an incubator can have a number of these competencies, but will not necessarily have all of them. And that shouldn't be a reason to limit it. You want to be as inclusive as possible.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much for that contribution.
Sure.
All right. I'll go back to the chat and be able to see the other comments that are coming in. Just a minute. All right, so I see Wilfred says, we should be wary of overregulation. What are the benefits of being registered? Do all incubators need to be registered? Is it just another hurdle? Wilfred, I'd love to give you a chance to speak, just to hear from what perspective you're coming from. Your mic is now enabled. All right.
Yep. Thank you, Anne. So where I'm coming from, and this ties to the previous question, when you now have these definitions in place, it means that when you go to register, then you know government is government. So they might be there just with a checklist. Or do you have this? No, you don't have this. You can't be registered. You don't have a space for startups. You don't have partnerships in place with universities. So how do we make this less complicated in terms of registration? Because that idea of being registered as an entity and then also have to register as an incubator, and then there are things that you have to adhere to once you've been registered, I think that can stiff forward growth and innovation, given that we don't have a one-size-fits-all anywhere globally when it comes to an incubator. I haven't seen any country yet that is registering them as a special category, because it's so hard. I mean, we all have different forms. Some have virtual incubation, some do programs, some don't do programs. Other incubators have a fund, others don't have a fund. And in mature ecosystems, to agree with the previous speaker, it is very hard to have this very tight definition, and then on top of that, add a registration requirement. So unless there's a benefit to register in terms of tax incentives, then I wouldn't register. I would look at, maybe I don't want to call myself an incubator anymore. If it's too much, I would rather now become a fund or an accelerator. So that's what I was thinking.
I'd like to provide a little bit of a clarification. I think in the Act, and I want to project it on my screen, I don't know if it's visible, they give the flexibility of that you provide either of those services. And of course, they don't expect you to be providing all of those services, but they expect that you're providing one or either of those services. And then again, as you run your business as an incubator or accelerator program, you're genuinely already registered. So the gist of you registering to this entity is really focusing on the fact that you want to be recognized and added to the list of organizations that are seen as people who support entrepreneurs and startups. I don't think they're asking you to do a double registration. They're referencing the registration your organization has already done with the registrar. But in the case of organizations that are setting up from start right now, then in that sense, then they are required to meet some of those objectives that are specified. You can just let me know if that's clear enough, or
that's
a little bit of clarification.
That's clear.
All right, fantastic. So I see we have another comment. As a follow-up on the same, incubator should ideally be something easy, but this looks like it's going to be an exclusive club for those who can afford to get the bureaucracy of registration that's in Kenya. Is it possible to simplify the draft? What would you like us to simplify, John? Thank you so much for your comment. Yeah. Do you want to be able to speak? 1 second, let me find the same. 1 second, John. All right, John, you're now enabled to talk. Let me know if you're able to chat.
I wanted to inquire.
All right.
I come from a non-technological background.
Okay.
And that's why I'm saying that it somehow feels like I am at a disadvantage. I will need to go into another line of technology to be able to understand what this bill is all about. You've explained well to the previous, guy who asked the question, but I was still here thinking, I thought this bill's entirety is to make it easy for people who can access it, not necessarily people in technology, not necessarily people who have businesses. That is what I had in mind when I was coming to this meeting. Is there a way we can simplify it enough for such that we know, like in the village, somebody can say, I have this idea, I just don't know what to do, and it will be easy to channel them and tell them, speak to somebody, do something, and it is going to be easy. Or otherwise, I feel like the jargon is what is more important at this particular time.
Thank you so much for that feedback. I think I can clarify in a few areas. Depending on how you're coming into this bill, are you coming as a startup or are you coming as an organization that supports startups? The gist of this bill is that there are a lot of innovators in the country and they need to be able to be supported. So if you've been looking at the conversations in the past, a lot of innovators are struggling with things like access to capital. They're struggling with access to support. There's some who need access to some research and R&D, some who need access to networks, which can introduce them and help them generate either funding or business opportunities for their innovations. And so what the government is really looking to do is, one, we need to recognize that startup entities are unique. And yes, a little bit of this bill is a little bit exclusive in terms of there's already a lot of legislation support that exists for regular SMEs. But for startups in particular who have unique problems and unique challenges, there's never been a legislation that directly affects them. So in this sense, some of the thinking behind the drafting of this bill was, one, we want to make it easier for anyone with an idea in any region, all the way from Marsabit all the way here to Nairobi, to be able to, if you have an idea and you think it's going to use a little bit of technology to innovate and solve some kind of mandate, that we'll be able to provide you with some kind of access to support. And this access to support, the goal of this bill is that the access to support is decentralized. And because the government is there for making legislation and providing frameworks that can support the implementation. Here we're looking at three things. One, we're looking at if the government needs to provide some high-level support, what does that support looks like? And so some of the things that came up while this bill was being drafted is, one, registration is a challenge. Two, access to capital is a challenge. And so at some point, we must address some kind of money support that needs to come into this bill. Three, we were looking at providing some kind of leeway to the startup organizations to ensure that they thrive. There's a lot of research that shows 75% of startups die before year 3, which is quite high. And so to reduce the mortality rate of startups, we need to be able to provide some kind of fiscal support. So currently, this support is already happening through private entities like hubs and incubators and accelerator programs all across the country. With this bill being put in place, one of the things we feel it'll go a long way in doing, and if you look at some of the provisions under the last section, it'll go a long way in providing some kind of de-risk framework. So what this bill is saying is, hey, let's introduce a startup bill, and then within it, let's provide frameworks for support through either existing agencies like Kenya or NACOSTI or others, and KIPI, who provide intellectual property support, and decentralize this support all the way down to the counties, so that then any innovator who wants to use technology to execute a mandate can be able to be supported. I don't know if that covers a little bit to answer your question, but that was just a quick summary on the same.
I guess it's enough. Let's say as we go by, maybe it's the understanding that is not there fully, but I hope that what you've explained will be clearer day by day. But for the time being, I guess it's enough. I will do a follow-up questions later.
Okay, that's fine, but keep sending the questions in the chat. Again, I also want to reference Michelle's link earlier on the chat, where if you feel a specific clause needs to be amended, please fill in the feedback form and type the clause number and then tell us what exactly you would like modified in that sense. I'm going to quickly jump back to the provision. So I had opened the bill, the specific bill, just to look at section 19 and section 22. And so section 19, part 4 was really focusing on the certification of incubator. So if you're already an existing incubator entity and you want to be recognized by government as an organization that provides this such service, it was clearly laying out what you need to provide to get that certification. If you've gone through, I think, the youth registration process, you know, to be able to get that youth certificate, there's some processes you need to comply with. In the same way, the startup bill is providing that if you're an existing ESO and you want to support the startups, there's some compliance you need to do to be able to get that certification and be recognized as an organization that supports entrepreneurship. And then, of course, the entity, if you want to meet the criteria as the incubator, section 20 just goes into detail about the same. And here it talks about the things about your registration, your objectives. You give a little bit of background of what you do, because you will be joining a registry list, where we will be able to showcase you in to investors abroad and within the country. So then section 21 and 22 are just further following up on what the incubator that's registered shall do in terms of obligations in that sense. All right. So another question that's been coming up has to do a lot with incentives for startups. So, for example, we see a lot of organizations. Just a minute. I'm going to just present it a little. Here we're seeing a lot of organizations asking, how are these incubators and entrepreneur support organizations supposed to support the startups? And there we look at clause 22 that covers the detail of that. I'll quickly jump back to the chat and the comments. Thank you so much for sending the comments. Keep sending them in. I see David says, incubation companies, I hope will have time limits. Other jurisdictions have time limits of say 8 years and review based on it. The Act should ensure that the incubators are covering a broad perspective, say in AI, in life sciences, in biopharma, et al. So lastly, the government needs to invest in incubators up to 40%, while the private investors can buy at and predetermine the price for exit just to kickstart. I like that question, David. Would you like a chance to speak on the same? Let me find your name. I've enabled you to talk.
Hi, Anne.
Hi.
I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
So basically, where I come from, just before I came to the meeting, I really looked into, I think, 2 jurisdictions. That should be the Israel and Ireland.
Okay.
And what they do within the incubation is whereby you'd find in Israel they have something called YASMA program, whereby within the YASMA program, that's where now you find the government investing up to 40% in the incubation in an incubator, and the private investors or invest the other 60, and they can buy out the government, but the government comes in to kickstart the process. Also, we should be very deliberate in the functions of the shall I say, the ones that are in charge of the oversight government body that will be in charge of it, whereby you should be deliberate in the aspect whereby they need to have policies or programs that you'll find you'll have, let's say, let me give you just a quick example. You'd have someone in biopharma or someone in AI having a project that is taken up, but for the technology to be fully sufficient, there has to be a link between different incubators. So you'd find someone in AI might need someone in biopharma. We should be very deliberate in how the government should be able to link incubators, so that at least the people within a certain sector can be able to link up with some other sector, so that at least they can come up with something. Other than that, on time limits, we find that if you're not deliberate in the time limits, there might be risk of misuse by the incubators. So we need to have a time limit that is deliberate, so that after 8 years it can be reviewed. And lastly, in regards to the funding that comes from the private investors, maybe we should include the financial institution that can be able to manage the investments from, let's say, the private institutions that come from that are foreign, and we might also need to be deliberate in putting it in the act.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that contribution. All right, I've taken it in. I would also like to ask you if you can add it directly into the feedback form, so that and the details of it, so that it's well captured as well. Thank you very much.
Okay.
All right. So I'll keep looking at the comments. I see someone, Denzel, thank you for your comment. You say, I need clarification on what de-risk investments mean. All right, so one sec, that's in this section. All right, so there is a proposal in the miscellaneous section of the bill, that's this page, where we talk about setting up a fund. So some of the things that came up while this bill was being drafted were 3 things. Sometimes just by guaranteeing someone else can give them money. I don't know how to put it in another way. And so in that sense, we're looking at if somebody endorses your startup, it makes you a little bit more safe, and investors are more confident in pumping in money because someone else has vouched for you. So the whole idea of the de-risk fund and de-risk investments was such that sometimes the government or local investors don't necessarily have to put in money, but just by vouching for a particular startup or entity, other investors from either local or abroad would be confident enough to put in their money. Another aspect of that whole de-risk framework that is a proposal in the bill is such that we put in some provisions to secure not just the innovators, but also the investors. I think there's been some unfortunate cases where investors have pumped in money into an organization and it has gone south. And so the de-risk layer in this sense is being looked at both ways, and that framework that is being proposed is such that, one, it provides some provisions to endorse the startups, and then 2, it provides provisions to protect the investors, where in case an investment doesn't go very well, they can recoup a percentage of their investments. So Mr. Denzel, let me know if that's clear enough. I'll enable you to talk, so maybe you can add a few things on that. So allowed to talk. Please let me know your comments on the same. Denzel, do you wish to say anything? All right. Oh, hi, welcome. Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So to be honest, I'm still confused. Because what you're saying is sort of, I think I haven't really understood the argument of de-risking it on both the startup at the investor level. So I think the risk on the investor side will actually, it's more individual, and I don't see how exactly the government can be able to actually financially de-risk it. I'll need more example for me to understand your example.
Oh, that's fine. That's fine. So just for now, I'll pack it just a little bit so that I can trace the exact part of the bill where we talk about the de-risking framework that is being proposed. And then I'll come back to it on the same. While that's going on, I see we've run out of the comments, so I'll come back also to the presentation. Allow me to address the specific issue you flagged just a little after I finish this remaining bit of the presentation. All right.
Okay, sure.
All right. So let me go back. Just a second. Presentation. There we go. Okay. So now we come back to some interesting questions. I think we've covered some of them, but for those that we haven't, this is a great time. This is a great time to discuss. So in that sense, we're looking at a few arising matters, and Denzel, I think you've also alluded to one of those. Is it clear now why startup incubators are important in the startup bill? Oh dear. Again, I've seen another question from another participant in the chat that says there's a heavy focus on registration of incubators in the bill, and what kind of support will they aim to receive by going through this process? What's in it for them? I think I'd love to hear from you guys in terms of whether by you going through the whole process of getting certified and registered, whether it's the value would be clear for you as why you're going through that whole process in the first place, or in case that value is not clear, what you would like us to modify in the bill so that then the value also for the incubators and entrepreneur support organizations becomes clear. Again, another question that's coming up is there are several conversations so far that reference that the bill should be a money bill because what startups need is capital. And at what point do we get to the capital access conversation in the stages of the bill? So we've put up an FAQ page in the startupbill.ke URL. I'll be sharing it in the chat shortly after, or if Michelle can share the link from me. And in that sense, we talk about the different stages that the bill will go through. I can quickly jump to it. So this is what the page looks like when you get a chance to look at it. And it has a section of about the home. It has the home page where you can download the bill. You can provide your comments on this whole process directly. Every comment we receive today from the URL that has been shared will be channeled to this site as well. And then we have a section on about the bill, a section on what the bill process looks like, and of course news and updates, because there's a lot of forums going on and a lot of recordings. Like for example, yesterday on Citizen TV, Senator Sakaja was addressing some of the concerns and the questions on the startup bill, and of course upcoming events that you can tap into on the same. So with that in mind, of course, in the about section, we talk about why the bill is important. And the main objectives of the bill, if it hasn't been clear yet, is to foster a culture of innovation and entrepreneurship, to provide a framework for the registration of startups. Again, I saw in the comments that we're over-regulating the whole process of registration. So I'd be very happy to hear from you guys which parts of the registration process need to be simplified in that sense. Again, the whole goal of this bill also is to provide a framework for linkage of startups with private investors, financial institutions, the private sector, research institutions, and such other institutions at the county and national and international level. The whole goal of the bill, again, is to provide another framework to facilitate investments in startups. And the whole aspect of the de-risking is really tiered around this section 4 of the bill. This 4th point of the bill, sorry. And then the bill also aims to provide a framework to facilitate the provision of fiscal and non-fiscal support for the startups in Kenya. The bill also aims to promote an enabling environment for the establishment, development, and conduct of business and the regulation of startups. The bill aims to provide a framework for the establishment of incubation facilities at the national and county level of government. And the bill helps to provide an M&E of the legal and regulatory framework that encourages the development of startups. So you can get this and many details in the website, startupbill.ke. The stages of this bill is, it was read in Parliament last week. It was presented for the first reading in Parliament. It's now going to start going into committee stage. And we are currently in the process of carrying out public participation for the next 30 days. So you'll notice we're putting out a lot of communication on where forums are happening. Of course, with COVID, a lot of the forums now are happening virtually, but I guess there are some physical forums that are happening as well. And if you look at the upcoming events section of the website, you'll be able to see which event is coming up and how you can participate. I think right now, concurrently, as I'm running this, the people in the Coast Province are also running a participation section on the same. So once the bill is read again in Parliament, it will proceed to committee stage. So we're hoping that between now and before it gets into the second reading, that we will have received as many amendments as possible to ensure that they are implemented in the changes before the second reading is passed. So there will be a second reading and a third reading where there will be a vote on the bill. And once the bill is passed in the Senate at the third reading, it is then now pushed to the National Assembly. The reason it's not a money bill yet is because the Senate cannot pass money bills. Money bills are generally discussed in the Parliament and the National Assembly in that sense. So in this case, we're looking at things like if we need provisions for actual monetary support, at the point where the bill is being introduced in the National Assembly, those are where we can channel some of that feedback into the bill before it's read, so that then the bill that is being introduced to the National Assembly covers even the monetary support that we believe the startups that we are referencing will need. Again, we'll go through a first, second, third reading, followed by a vote in the National Assembly. And once a bill is passed in the National Assembly, it's referred back to the Senate for concurrent changes to be made in the bill, if any. And once the two houses, they concur with the bill, as passed by both houses, the bill is referred to the President for assent. And if the bill is assented by the President, it becomes an act of Parliament. So those are the stages that this is going to go through. Currently, we are at public participation stage, and we hope to get as much input as possible on the same. So I'll quickly jump back to the Q&A section and see if there are any questions that have come up. Just a minute. All right. Here's a link. Okay, thank you, Philip. I see you've sent to us a link for the bill that you were referencing earlier. Thank you very much. Irene, I see you've mentioned with regards to the incubator, as mentioned on a startup may not have necessarily been developed under an incubator and may have been developed by an independent individual, an SME, or a collaboration with an existing business. Irene, would you like a chance to share some of your views on the same? I can probably enable you to speak. 1 second. Irene, let me give you a chance maybe to speak and share some of your views. Talking is now permitted. You can share your views. Welcome, Irene. All right, Irene, I guess you're not able to say anything, so I'll just move on to the next comment. Okay, Wilfred, another comment from you. The bill should not affect in any way the principles of capital markets. Maybe you can clarify on that. Over to you, Wilfred.
Thank you so much. So as you are speaking, my mind goes to For example, if the bill tries to define the period of incubation, how many you should incubate, for how long, then you don't want to be forced. First of all, if an idea is unviable and you are halfway into the incubation program, the incubator should be able to just graduate you out without them getting any repercussion. We don't want someone quitting the bill and saying, oh, this incubator had accepted me and then they kicked me out of the program, and then you get into all these. It should be a free market, right? Same with the shareholding. You know, we have the buy side and the sell side. Some of these incubators take equity, and why we take equity is that when the next transaction happens, when downstream investors invest in these startups, we're able to get an exit, and that's how some incubators remain sustainable. So again, you don't want to be regulated so that if you take, let's say, one idea might be worth $1 million, and that means that you take, let's say, 5% if you're giving them $50,000. But you don't want to be subjected to all incubators have to take X%. No incubator should take more than this amount of equity, because those discussions keep rising in the ecosystem even without the bill. You hear people saying, "Oh, that incubator, it's taking this. Why is this incubator taking this much equity? Why is this other incubator charging for the program, or the other one is free?" So those are the things that we should let it be a free market, just the same way that the capital markets operate, because in any way we create a pipeline for people in capital markets. So if this bill achieves two things, I think if it achieves two things, it will be a good bill. If it simplifies ease of doing business and it gives incentives for incubators and startups, it will have achieved its purpose. The more it gets into regulation and the more it gets into now black and white and the definition and regulations and defining the term, they becomes constrictive. So it should be very broad with two broad objectives, and then keep it at that. Otherwise, law can be interpreted, especially when it's enacted and becomes a bill. Law can be interpreted in any manner to favor the other person. Someone can just come and say, referring to the law, I was kicked out of a program. I need to be paid. I need to be compensated. So those, maybe I'll stop there for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that sentiment. It's well captured as well. I would also encourage that you add it in the document so that we don't miss it as well. Thank you so much. I see Nordine has raised a comment. He says this should be incorporated in the curriculum so that innovation can be nurtured at an early stage so as to reduce the unemployment facing the country. I completely agree with you, Nordine. Is this a general sentiment, or would you like it further more of this to be able to be added? And while I enable you to talk, I just want to bring back to Irene. Irene, did you want to speak and share your comments?
Okay. No, I wanted to find out in the event that you actually do develop a startup, but not within the incubator space.
Okay.
Will that be regarded as a startup?
Yes, a startup is a startup. I mean, so long as you do your innovation, the idea for the registration and the certification that is being required is such that if you want to be endorsed, when the bill eventually becomes a money bill, I think if you look at the miscellaneous provisions in that section of the bill, the idea for registration or working through an incubation organization is because then they would be able to provide the de-risking framework to be able to endorse you or recommend you where large investments are coming in and you require someone to vouch for you that your startup is a startup and it exists, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know if that makes it clearer.
Receive the same benefits in terms of the incentives, resources, support from the government or any other, support base that will be there.
Yeah.
Despite having not worked well within the constraints of an incubator.
Yes. So now the limitation just becomes that if you now want to be able to, because a lot of this support will be channeled through the incubators in the national and county levels. through the engagements, whether with private organizations or with the public, right? And so then if you want to benefit from some of these incentives, then you have to be part of one of those programs to be able to benefit from that. I think it's a practice that's still ongoing even now in different incubators and accelerators. So that more or less is the thinking behind it. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much. All right. I'll go back to the Q&A section. Nordin, you had mentioned the curriculum. Do you want to speak so that I can enable you to speak? Nordin, hold on. No, sorry if I'm pronouncing the name a little bit wrong. You're enabled to speak right now in case you want to share some of your sentiments.
Hi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Mine is simply, I believe if this is nurtured at an early age, we'll end up having people who believe in self-employment rather than having to finish school, graduate, get papers, then walk all around looking for papers. Now, if the startup bill is actually assented to, and we have it as an act, and then we can have, via Parliament, have it source funds for people, I believe we'll be at a better place, because currently as the world is evolving, technology is evolving, and the world, the people, things are changing. Even thanks to COVID, you can see we're even having this meeting via the virtual meeting. So I believe if we focus more so on this, and as they say, the kids being born today are tech kids, you know? So when they're taught this at an early age, I believe we'll be at a better place, and the country will evolve. That is part and parcel of industrialization at the end of the day, because technology is one of the mechanisms of our country attaining industrialization.
I couldn't agree more. I completely agree with you. And I think it's definitely something that should be encouraged to be taught in the schools. The challenge just becomes how easy or hard it becomes to implement. I think one of the things that's really exciting to see is the CBC that's being taught in the schools right now has some elements of innovation plowed in. And so maybe that would be something to watch along the way.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. All right.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. I see a question from Dan Mwangi. How does the bill protect founders of Kenyan startups from investors who would invest in a startup and eventually kick out the founder? Dad, I'd love to enable you to speak just to hear a little bit more of your perspective. You can speak. I've allowed you to talk. Over to you, Dan.
Thank you, Anne. So in the past, we've seen some cases whereby a local founder has a partner from maybe from the States, and after they found the company and have investors from out there, eventually they are voted out of the company and they lose, from the company that they founded. I don't know if the bill has a provision whereby a founder who have started a startup locally can be protected. Like, for example, maybe the founder has to maintain majority shareholding, specifically for the startup. Yeah, that's my question.
Yes, I think you're looking at a lot of IP rights. The bill covers IP and protection of innovations in several sections. Please pardon me if I don't know the exact clause right now, so I'll just try and quickly find it. But on one hand, it mandates the organizations that are supporting startups and innovators, one, to be able to provide them with information and know-how of how to register their innovations for intellectual property. Of course, if there are other people on the chat who want to take a stab at the question Dan has raised, please just comment in and I'll be able to enable you to talk. It covers, yes, the part 5, that's clause number 23, talks about how the agency and the county executive committee. So there's an agency that is proposed to be set up by the cabinet secretary that puts in place provisions for how to fund these innovations and how to even protect them. So that agency would have the mandate of Part B, facilitating the protection of intellectual property within the innovations of Kenya and with international organizations. and providing relevant fiscal support. So I think one of the questions I would throw back to you is, especially with regards to the protection of this, would you like some specific clauses included where the framework, at least in the framework that will be set up under that provision, so that then there are some specific clauses for the investors to be able to meet the criteria so that they don't invest in a startup and eventually kick out the founder. I think you're still able to talk. Maybe you can say something there.
Yeah, if it's possible, yes. I think maybe because we are talking about startups specifically in this case, and sorry to say, we have some investors out there who are actually predatory, because if the innovation, the idea is really good, they would come with the intention of eventually kicking out the founder and then have the company for themselves. So probably if it could be looked at, see, so long as it is considered as a startup, then an investor would not, the ownership has to be local, or has to be Kenyan in this case, for a certain period of time, maybe up to 10 years or so. Not a case whereby you are a startup founder and within 2 years after you started, you've gained traction, you've gained some good funding, and you're now bringing in profits, then you're thrown out of your own company.
Okay, I think you're very right, and definitely within the provisions for section 23 and 24, maybe those are some of the considerations that should be added in the framework. I think if you look at section 24 of the bill as well, it says, and this will also answer the question that Denzel had asked. If the cabinet secretary establishes a credit guarantee scheme, okay, maybe first to answer your question, Dan. Yes, these provisions definitely need to be modified, and the details of that will definitely not be in this bill specifically, but in the frameworks that will govern the implementation of all these proposals that have been recommended in the bill. So it's definitely worth adding. I would recommend that you also add it in addition to mentioning it here into the document link that we have shared on the same. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you.
Denzel, over to you. You had asked a question about the de-risk fund. So there is a proposal in the bill, section 24, that says the cabinet secretary may, in consultation with the board of trustees of the fund, and where necessary, for the development and growth of startups under this act, establish a credit guarantee scheme. So in part 2 of that proposal of the bill, it says that where a cabinet secretary establishes a credit guarantee scheme, it shall have as its objectives a few mandates. 1, provision of accessible financial support to startups. 2, a framework for the credit guarantee for startups. 3, guarantee for investors in startups. 4, availing of financial and credit information to startups. And E, capacity building on the financial and risk management to startups. So the de-risking framework that is being proposed is really around a credit guarantee scheme on both ends of where money is given and where endorsement is given in exchange instead of money for the startup to be able to access funding from potential investors. And so in part 3 of that same section 24, it talks about where the credit guarantee scheme is established. There are some operations that it needs to meet and some criteria where it looks at criteria and eligibility of funding and qualification for the recipients under the funding scheme, criteria for monitoring and evaluating the projects undertaken under the scheme, and a mechanism for transparency and accountability and reporting on the activities under the scheme. So if they're putting up money or putting up support in exchange for money, they're trying to establish a framework of transparency around the whole process. And you can find more details of what the de-risking will look like, especially in section 24. Thank you. I'm conscious of time. I'm seeing we're 11 minutes over time. Just to answer Patrick, I've put in a link called, oh, sorry. I've put in a link, startupbill.ke, where you can download the bill on the same.
Sorry.
Yes.
Sorry, there's a question from an attendee. Is the bill mainly focusing on startups brought in by incubators? I'm under the assumption that the bill through this discussion seeks to focus mainly on incubator certification and incentives, but how does the bill support independent startups?
The independent startups, the whole idea is if you want to be recognized as a startup, the bill provides provisions for what criteria you need to meet to be able to be considered as a startup. And that's in section 8, if I'm not wrong. Sorry, I'm trying to scroll as fast as possible on the same. So in section 8, if you're a startup in general and you just want to be recognized as a startup, but necessarily not tied to an incubator organization, then this is the criteria you need to meet. Either have not been in operation for 8 or 10 years for the case of biotechnology companies, and meet all these other definitions that have been provided for. Does that answer the question? Maybe we can enable them to talk. I'm not sure who that specifically was. Michelle, you can help me with that. Which specific participant? So maybe we can give them a chance to say something on the same.
They go by the name anonymous attendee. Let me just look for them so I can enable them to speak.
All right. Yes, anonymous attendee will give you a chance to speak on the same. Yes. I don't know if I've missed any specific question. So I see, Denzel, you ask a follow-up question. Does the de-risking part not introduce a conflict of interest within government that is inhibiting competition to protect their investments? I don't think that's the case. I'll just give it from the perspective of myself as an attendee of those discussions at that time. The whole idea of de-risking is just really its endorsement. There's a higher likelihood of you. It's extremely hard for startups to raise money. It's getting easier with time, but having been in the ecosystem for the last 10 years, it's been a bit of a challenge for several innovators in the country to raise money and the capital they need in particular to be able to scale their businesses. And so the proposal around this de-risking framework was really around, sometimes I can present myself to an investor during the due diligence. They don't know much about me, so I am exposed as high risk. But then it becomes easier if a reputable organization endorses them, then the investor is just, a little bit more free to, a little bit more secure to support. So you're talking about conflict of interest. So this organization that is being endorsed to manage this credit guarantee scheme already exists, if I'm not wrong, and part of their mandate is already that. So instead of setting up a whole new organization to carry out this mandate when an existing agency is available, the idea is this agency would use the data from the registry to be able to first create awareness of these are the innovators and this is what they're innovating in, because that registry is missing. It's sort of going to different hubs and different universities and research institutions to find out what innovations are taking place. It's still largely very hard for a lot of innovators to be discovered in that sense. And then two, the government is using that agency just to manage the channels under which the investments are coming through, that pipeline for more transparency and awareness. So I don't think, in my personal opinion, that they're inhibiting competition, because they're not doing it themselves. They're working through agencies and private-public partnerships to execute that mandate. But I'm open to correction. And of course, if it's something that needs modification in the bill, we recommend that you include the clause and provide a recommendation for how it should look. Conscious of time, thank you so much for joining me for the past 1 hour just to discuss some of these key aspects of the startup bill, and especially how they support, they relate to the entrepreneur support organizations. Is there a question you think we didn't capture in this conversation? Is there something you would like us to address while we're still on this call? I'm opening it up for the next 5 minutes. Yes, Michelle?
Yes, there's a question from Ambrose Mbuvi. The bill adds an extra level of registration for startups. This in itself increases level of bureaucracy instead of reducing it. Also, I am not sure whether it will cover startups outside the incubation stroke acceleration ecosystem.
Ambrose, I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on this. Can we enable you to talk just to hear a little bit more of your thoughts on the same? One sec. Participants. Ambrose Movie, you're enabled to talk. Looking forward to hearing your comments. Thank you. Yes, Ambrose. Hello. Ambrose, you want to say something? All right. Let's see. So yeah, with regards to registration, once you're ready, Ambrose, you can just let me know. Sorry. With regards to the registration, yes, that comment has come up. I think I would really recommend what modifications would you like us to put in those provisions and the requirements for registration? Because as any innovation, you need to be registered anyway. So what we're saying is when you go to be registered, instead of just being registered as another business, that you would have the opportunity to also be recognized as a startup business that is getting registered. So that's why you see the provisions in the Office of the Registrar, and who in the Office of the Registrar would be in charge of being able to tag your business that has been registered as a startup, so that you're eligible now for any of the startup support that is coming up. So what would you like us to add? It would be interesting to hear your feedback on the same. Yeah. And of course, the point on you're not sure whether the startups outside the incubation and acceleration ecosystem will be covered. I think I covered it earlier, but just in case, I can cover it again. One is you can exist as a startup already with it outside of the incubator ecosystem. However, to benefit from some of these provisions and support that they are referencing in this bill, then you'd need to have been recognized as a startup or endorsed by any of those incubator accelerator organizations. Yeah. Yes, that's it from me. I thank you so much, guys, for joining me during this session. I hope we were able to demystify a little bit more. I've really enjoyed the questions and the comments that have been coming through with regards to the wins and the misses of the startup bill. Definitely, there's a lot of work that needs to go into the definitions and the registration issues, and of course, providing more incentives for the incubator accelerator organizations and other ESOs like yourselves, as well as just talking about all the other things that we think are relevant and important and that should be included in this provision. So we thank you for joining us. My colleague Michelle will reshare the link. Kindly send us your comments and your input on that so that then we would be able to aggregate them and submit them into the portal. Again, if you want more information, I'll just be sharing my screen briefly again to show you the website that you should definitely check out. The website is startupbill.ke. Alternatively, you can check out Senator Sakaja Johnson's pages on Twitter, and you can also engage him directly there. In this website, we provide details about the bill. You can be able to download the bill, and you can also be able to have your say on the bill. So here you can indicate the challenge that you foresee. For example, some of the challenges you've flagged, and you can formulate your proposal, and this data is aggregated to be sent into the updated memoranda, which will be facilitated or factored in when the public participation process is over. Again, we've provided a little bit of FAQs, frequently asked questions on the startup bill. So of course, there's issues around definition, issues around differences between startups and SMEs, definitions of the incubator, the roadmap for the bill, how you can contribute your say, and different incentives proposed in the startup bill. So some of the incentives that maybe have not come out right now, but are worth noting, and you can look at in the FAQ section, is there's a subsidized formalization of the startups. So I think what I'm hearing is this needs to be further modified and communicated in a better way so that people can understand in clear terms. There's provisions in the bill for the protection of IP of innovations by startups in Kenya as they engage with international organizations. There's provisions for fiscal and non-fiscal support to startups that are admitted into the incubation programs. There's provisions in the bill for support in the form of R&D, and of course, they also support in the form of a credit guarantee scheme for startups. So if anything is missing, let us know, have your say, so that we can be able to contribute to this bill and see it successfully pass through the Senate and then the National Assembly. So there is a video by Senator Sakaja on the site that talks a little bit about his wishes for the bill. It's about 4 minutes long. Just because of the interest of time, I wouldn't play it, but you can access it on the website and you can be able to hear a little bit about what he thinks about the bill and where it's going in that sense. Once again, on behalf of ASSEK and especially the policy desk, we want to thank you for joining us for this session. We look forward to engaging with you guys on the same. Over to you, Michelle, to wrap up the session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anne, for being able to take us through, and also just opening the platform for members and also participants to be able to clarify on sections they're unclear about on the startup bill. As you've all heard, you can head on over to startupbill.ke just to find more information about the startup bill, and also you can input your feedback there. We've also shared a link on the chat whereby you can be able to input your feedback. For now, I want to just thank you for availing yourselves, and we wish you a good evening. It's bye for me.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. Have a good afternoon. Bye. For the questions we weren't able to answer, maybe if you can input the comments in the link and we'll be able to follow up from there. Thank you. Bye.